Amid rising political tensions, the King of Thailand has urged his own supporters to speak out against what he called fake news during an interaction on Wednesday. King Vajiralongkorn and Queen Suditha attended a gathering in Bangkok on Wednesday, where the king told his supporters to not believe in any kind of fake news and distorted facts peddled by the protesters. A prominent royalist group leaders defended the monarch by saying that the king has been the victim of a web of distorted information.
จริงๆแล้วผมเชื่อว่าความรู้สึกของประชาชนที่ไปช่วงนี้นะสังเกตดูไหมว่าท่านเสด็จที่ไหนประชาชนไปเยอะมากเพราะประชาชนรู้สึกว่าท่านถูกกระทำที่แบบไม่ให้ความเป็นธรรมแล้วก็ข้อมูลเป็นการโกหกบิดเบือนการที่ประชาชนออกมาผมเชื่อว่าส่วนหนึ่งก็คือไปให้กำลังใจในหลวง
Months of demonstrations demanding a new constitution and reforms in power of the monarchy has created immense pressure on Thai King Vajiralongkorn. Protests and demonstrations have been rocking the streets of Thailand almost every day since the last few months. Thousands of protesters on Wednesday demonstrated outside the headquarters of the Siam Commercial Bank, the Thailand's biggest bank. The king's 23% stake is worth over $2.3 billion, and it makes the king the largest shareholder in the bank. Now, joining us on this broadcast from Edinburgh is journalist Andrew McGregor. Marshall. Andrew, welcome to WION. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, Andrew, you wrote a book in 2014 which is actually banned in Thailand. It's titled A Kingdom in Crisis, Thailand's Struggle for Democracy in the 21st Century. We'll discuss why you believe that Thailand is a nation which is struggling for democracy. But let's first talk about the situation on the ground. We know that the Thai government, the Thai Prime Minister, has come out and threatened the protesters with a less majest law. They face years in jail for merely criticizing the monarchy in Thailand. Despite that, we see regularly thousands of people on the streets in Thailand protesting against the Thai administration, the Prime Minister. They want a change in constitution. They want to curb in monarchy's powers. Is this, or are we witnessing a complete breakdown in the relationship between the monarchy and the youth in Thailand, because this movement is being led by students?
I think you're exactly right. I mean, what we're seeing is a historic moment. That's something that's never happened in Thailand before, that there's been a mass collapse of public faith in the monarchy, and especially the faith of the young people in the monarchy. Because Thais are taught really from their earliest childhood, they're taught all the way through school that they should revere the monarchy, that the monarchy is responsible for everything good that's ever happened to Thailand. And they're fed a constant diet of royal propaganda. But what's been happening in the last 2 years is that the behavior of the current king has become increasingly notorious. And also with the rise of social media, younger Thais have been able to look for alternative sources of information rather than the propaganda they get at school. And they've started to learn more about Thai history and Thai politics and understand that the monarchy was not really the benign institution that they were led to believe. So this has led to a complete breakdown, a complete collapse of trust in the monarchy, of faith in the monarchy, which is really unprecedented in Thailand. And that's what's driving the current protests.
You know, monarchy is a revered institution in Thailand, or has been traditionally. In fact, we do not even know the details of the assets of the monarch, but it is estimated to be somewhere in the region of $30 billion. The youth in Thailand want some more accountability as far as the monarchy is concerned. But where do you see this protest movement heading? Yes, this is a historic moment. Yes, Thailand hasn't witnessed protests like these in years. It is almost unprecedented in Thailand. But what is likely going to be the result, the outcome of these protests?
Well, I mean, by my calculation, the Thai monarchy is actually worth about $60 billion at least. Although it's hard to know exactly because there's no real transparency about their assets. But just from building what we know, I think it's worth at least $60 billion, possibly more. The frightening thing is that these protests seem to be escalating on both sides with no apparent hope for a compromise. Because we know the monarchy and the military, which supports the monarchy, they really don't intend to give any concessions. They don't want the monarchy to come under greater public scrutiny. They don't want the huge royal fortune to come back under the control of the people. And I think they'll be willing to fight to prevent any reform. But meanwhile, the students have shown repeatedly that they're willing to keep coming out on the streets day after day. There's another large protest planned for today. They've been attacked by water cannons. They've been shot at. They've been fired at with rubber bullets. They've had all their top leaders arrested, but they still keep going. And many people in the younger generation say, you know, if we don't do things with our generation, if we don't have reform now, when will we ever have it? So they're really determined as well. So what we're seeing is two quite implacable sides, no sign of the military or monarchy understanding that they really do need to reform. And we saw some violence at the rally earlier this week. We saw some shots fired. We saw some explosives thrown. The worry is that there'll be an increasing level of confrontation as the military and the police kind of ramp up the crackdown on these protests. They start using violence, for example. And several times in Thailand's history over the past 50 years, Thai soldiers have opened fire on protesters on the streets of Bangkok. The most recent time was in 2010. And the great worry is that this will happen again, that the palace will lose patience with these protests and decide to crack down on them using force.
Anyone watching our broadcasts around the world, anyone watching these pictures that we are putting out for you from the streets of Bangkok must realize that all of these protesters on the streets face 15 years, possible 15 years in jail for merely criticizing the monarchy. Still, day after day, they are on the streets voicing their demands. And, you know, the Thai leadership, the Thai Prime Minister has threatened to impose the lèse majesté law, which threatens these protesters with imprisonment, and it has caused an uproar all across the world. Human rights lawyers, human rights organizations, in fact, the Paris-based International Federation for Human Rights has said that lèse majesté must not be used to criminalize pro-democracy protest leaders and participants. So it has drawn criticism worldwide. Tell us, Andrew, you wrote that book in 2014, which is banned in Thailand. Why do you think Thailand is a country in crisis? Why do you think it's a kingdom that is struggling for democracy in the 21st century?
Well, I mean, I'm somebody who's broken the lèse majesté law several times myself, many times. So if I went back to Thailand, I'd be put in jail too, because this law prevents anybody really talking about the monarchy in any kind of critical, analytical way. The only permitted discourse about the monarchy is to praise it unconditionally. And when a journalist like me tries to analyze the monarchy, we break the law. And so I can't return to Thailand for that reason. The reason I believe Thailand is a kingdom in crisis is precisely this, because at the heart of Thailand's politics, you have this unaccountable monarchy, vast amount of wealth, vast amount of power that nobody's allowed to talk about. So every time over the past century and more, Thailand has tried to build a democratic government, we've seen a military coup endorsed by the palace. This has happened more than a dozen times. Thailand has had more military coups than almost anywhere on earth. And this meddling in Thai politics by the monarchy and by the military has always prevented democracy to grow. And that's the reason Thailand's been so unstable for so many years. And we've seen wave after wave of protests on the streets of Bangkok, culminating right now in this latest wave led by young people. And unlike previous protests where they wanted the government to go or they wanted changes to the constitution, the protesters now are quite clear that what their target is. They want to focus on reform of the monarchy because they've realized that until the monarchy really is reformed and stops meddling in politics and undermining democracy, Thailand can never really move forward.
Andrew, thank you so much for joining us on WION and giving us your insights on the crisis that the people of Thailand find themselves in the midst of.